What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Coach U podcast. I'm your host, Coach U. Today we have Coach Steven Whyte, who's a performance coach who's passionate about bringing the fun back to training through gamification, building community, and gaining athlete buy-in. Enjoy the show. Steven, thank you so much for joining us, man.
John, thanks for having me on, man. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
I really want to dive right in and ask you, what happened to the fun in the coaching world and in the training world?
I think it's always been there in some senses, and like anything else with training, I think it's come and go with waves, just like fashion. Things come in fashion and out of fashion. I know when I was coming up, my coaches were all fans of Herb Brooks. If you've seen the movie Miracle, not a lot of fun and not a lot of smiles and laughing during the lead up to the Olympics. The coaches that coached me when I was growing up seemed to all be fans of Herb Brooks because there was a lot of high intensity and yelling. And not that they were bad coaches, but this was just what was in vogue, which, had its place and had its values. And I definitely derived a lot of value from it, whether it was from actual, positive outcomes or from learning things that didn't work for me or didn't work for people around me. So that was very much my experience coming up as an athlete. I just emulated the coaches that I had growing up. I didn't have my voice. I didn't have my style. And none of us start off that way. We all start copying what we experienced growing up. I'm not inherently a hard ass or someone who takes themselves too seriously. So it probably didn't come off genuine when I was trying to play that way to my players early on and emulate these coaches who were that for me.
Well, give me an example of that. I'm really curious.
I mean, it just didn't feel authentic for me. And I know a lot of it was probably, working through the nerves of being a younger coach and feeling that, feeling like I had to prove myself. I wasn't comfortable in who I was and didn't have that validation yet. That's not to say I'm someone without standards and without expectations. I am consistent and regimented and disciplined with many areas of my life. So that's not to say I don't have expectations for my players or for my athletes. I want you to have success. And in order for you to have success, it can't be all sunshine and roses. We need to have expectations that we uphold. But I found that we can achieve that without it being scary and miserable all the time. But, through reps and through experience and through time, I found my voice and became more comfortable in who I was in my style and found that my style can be effective if I do it the right way. And it doesn't have to be, drill sergeant coach in order to get things done.
Let's talk about gamification, because that was the first thing I saw from your page.
You can elicit the same outcomes, if not better outcomes, as the hard ass drill sergeant approach where it's all intensity all the time. You can elicit that intensity and that buy-in just as well, if not better, when things are gamified. We're all athletes. We're all incentivized by competition and by fun. It elicits that exactly what I want. So it's gamification with a purpose. Nothing's random. There's randomness, but controlled randomness. So I'm getting the stimulus. They're getting the inputs. I'm getting the outputs from them that I need to get the things that I want for them in the way of adaptation. But oftentimes it looks like fun. And some sessions look a little bit more what you might expect like a traditional S&C session to look. If I give a kid a tennis ball and some challenges to do with a tennis ball, they're going to be 10 times more bought into the session than if we just get on the line and do a dynamic stretch back and forth and go back. It makes me want to fall asleep. They've been sitting at school all day listening to directions. I think the last thing that they want to do is come into our sessions and then listen to me give directions, rather than I'll give you a task and a challenge, something that I know that's going to light you up and create this rich environment that you're interacting with. And I can kind of just sit off to the side and let you wake up and engage, and then we'll flow into our session. The gamification of, there's games that look like games, but then gamifying the training too, as far as the jumps, that's what really gets big outputs as well. We have all the cool tools. We have the vault equipment, so we can track sprints, we can track our jumps. We've got the Vertec for jumps, all that stuff. Great for collecting data, but in my opinion, better for eliciting buy-in and big outputs from the kids. So using the tools, half the time I'm keeping note, kind of mentally of like, okay, this kid's times are getting better, their distances are getting better, their jumps are getting better. They just want to compete with themselves and with their friends. They're getting this data, and it's a game for them. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways we use it in the gym, and I think again, as effective, if not more of effective of a tool than the other end of the spectrum.
What have you seen from the kids, the number one benefit to gamifying?
Just the buy-in and the want to go and do another rep and do it better without me having to push. It's intrinsically motivating. If it's a good drill, I can sit back and then they just let it rip. And I, at a certain point, have to be like, all right, guys, we got to stop and move on to something else. And
Right,
if
right.
there's a drill that I have to like reel them in and be like, hey, we got to do something else because, we only have so much time, that's a good drill. So a good game will do everything I need it to do with, you can look at it like lazy coaching. I look at it like that's a good drill. Whatever the constraints, whatever the rules are of the drill, it's getting them to do the thing they want to do. I forget where I heard this. We're also willing to do for longer without really realizing that we're fatigued. It's less fatiguing. Like we
Yep.
only have this like bandwidth or this well of grind, right? How many kids are going to do an extra sprint because it's something that's fun versus just being on the line and going back and forth?
Yep.
So, we're getting quality work, we're getting more work, and it doesn't feel as fatiguing because they're not having to push through something that they hate doing. Now there's value in pushing through things that are uncomfortable and discomfort, and there's places for that in training as well. Obviously, it's a big part of training, and I'm a big proponent of that. But it doesn't have to be all misery all the time.
Yeah. No, I think it could be easily misconstrued as that's kind of how training is. And I think for a lot of people, it can be that. And especially for kids, they're kids. You said something about the numbers too, and them seeing the numbers that are, their run time, their jump scores, with all of that. It's easy to get lost as a coach in the numbers, and we need to improve the numbers. That's what matters. But I don't think people realize, parents and their athletes, to hit a PR on anything, the stars have to align that day. You've had to have great sleep. Your nutrition's got to be on point. Stressor's got to be low. We can't really say what's going to give you that PR or beat your time. So how do you combat that? And how do you have communications with the kids?
It's funny you said that. There's been a number of teaching moments for exactly what you just said, like testing days. We'll test at the beginning of the season and at the end of the season. And by and large, we see upward trends. That's what you want to see, but not always. As you said, as you said, the stars have to align. So that exact thing has resulted in a lot of teaching moments of me talking through kids of you could jump one height one day and then jump a totally different height the next day, and then we talk about the factors that might lend themselves to a good day versus a bad day. So it becomes a teaching moment, and I can spin it that way, and they walk away having a better understanding of stress in their body and recovery and where big outputs come from. So that's kind of a positive spin we can use on it. And then the other way we combat it is I bake those things into training all the time. So there's not just like hey, today's the big day, today's the combine day, where it's do or die today and nothing else matters afterwards. We're getting jumps on the jump mat, on the Vertec. We're getting sprints with the sprint timers every week. And I'll do different versions of it, different distances. I'll make different games with the things. So they're always getting data. And so if they hit a PR, it's kind of a surprise. And as you said, if we do it frequently, the stars are going to align a number of those days. So they'll get chances to see good scores. They'll have days when they have bad scores. And then again, that will just result in a conversation about, okay, well, how did you sleep last night? What did you do this week? Are did you drink any water yesterday? What did you eat yesterday? So it can be educational, largely because we do it with such frequency. There's not these big devastating moments where like, oh, this was the only day to get the score. And then there's that big letdown.
I want to talk about
Yeah.
your experience as a teacher and how that's helped you translate that into the strength and conditioning world as a coach and to be able to be a communicator to your athletes.
I've been in sports and teaching and coaching for a long time, but I feel like in some ways that my strength and conditioning career is kind of in its infancy. I've only been doing it professionally for 5 years, full time only for 3 years, but it's always been a part of my life in some capacity. But all that to say that There's times where I wish I started it sooner. I wish, I majored in some kind of science, something helpful, exercise science, kinesiology, something in college. But that's just not that wasn't my path. I was a special education teacher, and during that time, as I mentioned, I also coached hockey and I also coached a unified track, which is Special Olympics track. So as much as sometimes I wish that I started, in on the X's and O's of coaching and strength and conditioning, my time teaching was probably as valuable as all that would have been. There's always time to learn the X's and O's, and we're all perpetually learning those things. There's too much to learn to know it all. So we're all going to be perpetual learners with the X's and O's. But as far as developing my communication and the delivery of the X's and O's. My teaching and coaching experience before strength and conditioning was invaluable for that stuff. Having experience working with a bunch of different learners and different personalities, none of those kids came from awesome situations. Stuff was going on at home, dad's not in the picture, mom's not in the picture, mom or dad is an addict of some kind or has their own issues going on. Nobody finds those kids don't find themselves in situations because they come from awesome situations. So all that to say, some pretty difficult moments at times with that demographic, but I found if I can make connections or communicate effectively with those kids. And I certainly didn't do it perfectly all the time. And I still don't do things perfectly all the time in the way of communication. But that was really formative in cutting my teeth with learning how to communicate with people who don't always necessarily want to be communicated with. And I think particularly and maybe uniquely so in the special education world where you're communicating to learners of a vast spectrum of abilities. And some kids are, more auditory learners. Some kids are more visual learners. Communication is your number one skill as a coach. You can have all the information in the world. If you can't effectively communicate that information, then you have nothing. Sometimes effective communication is backing off and saying nothing. What you want out of the moment might not mean beating someone over the head with words and trying to get to them if they're not ready to receive that thing.
How do you go about communicating to different learners and using different kinds of languages?
I mean, you need to know the person first, obviously. So I think laying the groundwork of understanding who they are. And there might be a fair, you get better at this and kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, profiling different people and saying, okay, this person reminds me of this, or I can kind of put them in this bucket to maybe expedite my time to learning how to communicate to them effectively. And with all generalizations, they're not always 100% accurate, but usually they're useful in speeding things up. But there's a fair bit of trial and error that goes with it. And sometimes you try stuff and it doesn't work. Again, hearkening back to my teaching days, like you have a thing or a method or maybe a coaching cue that, oh, this works with everybody. This is like a no-brainer. And then until you get to the kid who it doesn't work with. So you have to get creative and give yourself grace too and be patient with the process. Sometimes things don't click in a session. Sometimes things don't click in a month. Some kids walk in the door and they're right at home and they warm right up and they're the easy ones. You could say anything you want to them and they figure it out. They can take anything. And then there's the kids who are a little bit more challenging, a little bit more reserved for whatever reason. And sometimes you find out why and sometimes you don't. But I've had kids that have taken a month or a couple months to warm up, especially if you get a kid who only comes in 1 or 2 times a week. That's only a few hours a month that you have to build your rapport and figure them out. So sometimes it takes time. And I think understanding that and respecting that helps as well, and not feeling like you have to, get everything perfect on the first day or within one session.
How have you navigated the personalities individually versus when they're in a group setting? What have you seen and how have you navigated that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. Like there's individual personalities and then there's the personality of the group. And it's usually the bigger personalities will dictate the personality of the group. Usually and again, not all generalizations are 100% accurate, but usually it's the good athletes who tend to be a little bit louder and dictate the mood of the group or the personality of the group. I think making an ally in those athletes is a good play, even if they're, even if they have that kind of arrogance that kind of turns you off at sometimes, making an ally of those players, and almost enlisting them to be a captain of the group, having them demonstrate the drills. Because, A, they're going to do a good job, but then, okay, now I have some purpose and I have something that I want to show to the group. If you get them on board and you get them engaged with the session, then that's going to have a huge bearing on how the session goes for everybody else. And sometimes you got to nip them in the bud, if they're, we're doing things that are fun, and we talked about the gamification, but if they can't handle it, or if they're behaving in a way that's a detriment to the productivity of other people in the group, sometimes you got to just be blunt and nip them in the bud. Nobody wants to be embarrassed in front of the group. I've learned that from teaching too. So you can call the person out in front of the group. Nobody enjoys that, and oftentimes that might turn into a little bit of a power struggle, or I don't want to look like I just got told. So just having a quick word with them off to the side. Hey man, let's reel it in a little bit today. Let's have a good session. Whatever, whoever it is, whatever you got to say to them, depending on the kid, what they need. Most kids in the gym they're there for a reason. They know why they're there. They enjoy the process. So it's much, most of the time I'm not having to do like a tap dance to try to get them to buy what I'm selling. More often than not, it's reeling in excitable kids who are just kids, getting people online and just having a semblance of control within the chaos. Like, I like a fair bit of chaos. I like a fair bit of games, but as long as it's productive chaos and productive games.
Well, and that kind of leads into the next thing that we talked about, and I really want to discuss with you, is the ego being checked at the door, especially as a coach, because there are going to be times, and I know I've been through this, where you write up a program, you have everything set, but then not everything turns out the way that you expected or the way you envisioned. So I want to talk to you about the ego needing to be checked at the door, and why it's okay for an athlete to not do something exactly like you planned for them.
Oftentimes as coaches, we see our role as like needing to fix and perfect every little thing. And to a certain degree, like, we do need to facilitate like good techniques and things done in ways that we see to be productive, or moving them towards their goal, or physically moving in a way that's more efficient. But I think oftentimes we forget how many crappy reps that we did in our career growing up, and how many times we didn't do things the right way, or did things inefficiently. And certainly part of our job is to try to expedite the process from A to B. Not that B is it doesn't exist. There's no finish line. We can always get better, but try to expedite the time to mastery or to improvement. But a big part of that is failed reps, and doing things not well, and doing things that look ugly, and deadlifting with a gross form, whatever the thing might be. Let them get some crappy reps, and let them and have conversations about it, and not just be so quick to jump in and try to adjust and move everything. If somebody does something that I think is dangerous, or they might get hurt, then yes, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to put a stop to it. But again, if we think back to how many really bad reps, or bad decisions, or bad, whatever crappy technique that we went through ourselves and survived, and maybe learned something from it, maybe got a little bit banged up, but we learned something from it. And that's how we got to improvement, or got to mastery of the thing. As part of the process, there's value in that. And I understand, like, yes, we should try to expedite that a bit, and maybe help them avoid some of the pitfalls. But some of those pitfalls are necessary too. So, and there's that's kind of a moving target. There's a balance to that. But letting kids do things that look ugly sometimes, and stepping in and guiding and kind of bumping them in the right direction. But understanding, like, this is a process. It's not going to be perfect on day one. It's not going to be perfect in this session. It's, some athletes might get it right away, and others might not. Not feeling like you have to, back to the ego, like you have to, everybody under my supervision in front of me has to do it perfectly right now. That's a little bit of an ego trip, a little bit of a power trip. So remembering that all the crap you went through, all the bad reps you went through, and that's part of the process.
Our job as coaches is not just to teach the X's and O's and just teach squats and bench press and how to jump and run. It's really lessons, and it's really getting the kids through all the movements, but then understanding things, teaching moments. You made a post and I loved it because it's normally looked at as negative to overtrain, but you turned it into a positive. We can take something from that as a lesson. How have you used overtraining and your experience with overtraining to help your athletes?
I love this topic. First and foremost, you can't know where the line is unless you cross it. And now that's a tricky thing because you don't want kids necessarily to cross the line at the expense of their health getting hurt in the gym under your supervision. That's not a good thing to do. But anybody who's honest, that's a coach, would admit that they have crossed the line themselves at some point in time and maybe banged themselves up. Maybe we're a little too sore for too many days after, maybe tore their hamstring doing sprints. Through all these experiences, every coach, if we had a diagram of their body, could show you a map of all the ways that they got injured, all the all the bad decisions they've made.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but through those things, we've probably learned more than the average bird about our bodies and injuries and working through them and expectations of return to play and what that actually looks like. So there's so much value that's been derived from it. And then from a training standpoint, now I have data points of what happens when I do X, what tends to happen when I do X. So you get to know what's acceptable discomfort and what's discomfort that I need to respect. I gave myself patellar tendinopathy, jumper's knee in both knees. I was just training hard for too long. I was peaking everything. I don't want to lose my numbers. I got to keep going. I got to keep jumping. I was dunking. I was hitting big lifts. Things were good from an output standpoint, but I just had it revved up for too long. So I gave myself jumper's knee in both knees. Now, there were warning signs leading up to it that I failed to pay attention to because I have meat-headed tendencies. I ignored the warning signs and kept going until it became a real problem. And I still have, I'm still have to respect my knees and do things differently and take things into consideration now. Take my number of impacts into consideration. There's been so much that I've learned from that injury, essentially rehabbing myself. And so I learned a bunch about tendons. I learned about how to progress myself. I learned about expectations. I learned about timelines. All these things I took away from it. So now I have this wealth of knowledge that I can impart on athletes who might be going through the same thing. Again, the warning signs, discomfort that you can work through versus discomfort that you need to respect. So now I have these data points of that's, in this realm, in this area, that's a discomfort that's okay. That at most that will flare me up tomorrow and then I'll be fine for the rest of the week. Or I need to shut things down right now. That's not a good feeling, or this is not a good day for impacts. I'm not demonstrating plyometrics in the group, for the group today. I'm having someone else demonstrate them for me. So yeah, that's just one example of the acceptable discomfort versus the red flags that you got to pay attention to.
You said you had some warning signs with your knee. It's a really big skill that gets overlooked as a trainee, someone who is training. You have to understand your body, and everyone's different. Your signs are probably going to be different than mine. And I do think it's really important for athletes, kids, parents, everybody really, to understand pain and the nuances of it and how your body operates. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I always think just kind of as an overarching principle, like we should be working to work ourselves out of a job as coaches in the way of, I don't want my kids to have to come to me or my clients every time they have an ache and pain and be like, what does this mean? What does it mean? I want to truly like squeeze the most out of strength and conditioning and out of training requires an understanding of oneself. As you said, like I can listen to you, I can guide you, I can provide suggestions, but I'm not in your body. I don't feel what you feel. I don't know what's going on. So if I can build understanding with those things, then we're going to be winning on both fronts, because you can make decisions outside of the gym that are going to help you out. And, whether it's a performance thing, whether it's a recovery or a health thing, the more that you know and the more that you're in touch with your body, the better results we're going to get. So we're both going to be winning. Like I've done my job better. You're jumping higher, you're running faster, you're doing it for longer without injury. Those are all good things, and you are performing, you're healthy, and you're feeling good. The gurus who are like, oh, I have all the answers, and they kind of lord that power trip over the clients or over their community or over their athletes, whatever it might be, and try to make things as confusing as possible so that only I have the knowledge, I have the sacred knowledge. Red flags there. I think a good coach is trying to do the opposite. They're trying to make things as digestible and as understandable as possible, because ultimately, if you truly want results for the person, you want them to have the best understanding of the process and of themselves and of stressors and of recovery modalities, all the things, all the ingredients. The better they have that understanding, the more you're both going to win.
Man, I if I could go back and really think about all the, like you said, the dumb things we did and learning from our mistakes and being able to take something away from it, knowing oneself is the number one thing. You can listen to people all day. They're going to tell you what works. And hey, pieces of it might, and it might actually work for you. But you really have to catalog what your body feels like mentally, what's happening when you're in pain too, because I think it's really easy for people to just stop when there's pain. And we've been told for a long time, right? You rest, you don't touch it, you got to ice it, and pain is bad. I do not believe that at all. I think pain is an indication, and I think it's a warning signal, just like you said. It's a measure of where we're at, and being able to stop for a second, find what's tolerable, and stay just below that, because you want to have that threshold somewhere near where you're training. You want to be in that threshold, but not so much to where it's intolerable or you are causing more harm. What you feel and what you know about your body is going to be the most important thing, because you're the one who's going to have to navigate the process no matter who's helping you.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And people get into these cycles of like always shopping out to other people, which you should. As you said, like you should seek a professional, you should seek a good professional or a professional's help. But a good professional, a big part of their job, if they want to be effective and not just have you on the hook to have to come in every week for for perpetuity, should be that education piece where they're building that understanding. People get into these cycles where it's always shopping out their feelings to other people and never really taking the time to build that understanding themselves. And then they're just on this endless cycle of, I feel pain, I go to someone else, I feel pain, I go to someone else, and really not building like the tools to be able to handle that themselves. So they're dependent, forever dependent, and oftentimes they wind up limited rather than seeking to understand and kind of poke into the pain and get it, and rather than avoiding seeking and as you said, rebuilding that tolerance and convincing yourself, again, these are all things that a professional should help you do, but not just building capacity back in the tissues if things are injured, but also the confidence in yourself and reassuring your nervous system, like, hey, this is okay, we can do these things again without all these pain signals going off. It is interesting to see at different levels with different athletes and different people, from youth all the way up to adults, people's relationships with their pain and how it dictates their decision making and impacts their life. You might have a kid that falls down and like that looked like it hurt a lot, and they bounce right back up in their they're in pain, but they want to keep going, versus someone who's like, oh, I'm not coming in today because something kind of, my whatever is aching, or, there's endless examples, but it's interesting to see the different relationships with pain and how it drives people's decision making and their quality of life.
Yeah, I think the quality of life thing gets overlooked a lot, because we first go to, oh, well, now I can't train. And we don't think about what that effect has on our daily lives. But I mean, literally, it's everything. And I'm sure you've been through your injuries. I've been through mine, and the mentality you have to be resilient against it. You have to be very understanding of the process and respectful of that process, because no matter if it's pain that you're trying to get out of, if it's you're trying to PR your bench press, your sprint times, whatever you're working towards, you need to be, as you said, rigid in consistency. And so I want to ask you, what does that mean to you? Rigidity in consistency.
From a physiological, like X's and O's standpoints, like you're always getting exposure to the stimulus or the things, and we can extrapolate that out to anything that we're trying to get better at. But constant exposure. So we're getting the adaptations we do. We're building the capacity to do the thing. Again, whether it's a physiological thing, a psychological thing, public speaking, whatever it might be, you're getting exposures to the thing. More and more, it seems important to do the thing frequently and to do the thing consistently more than it is to do a huge dose of the thing all at once. So having those routines in place, that discipline in place to continuously, and it's such, when you step back and zoom out, it's such a no-duh thing, right? If you want to be good at something or you want your body to change, you do it a lot. You do so but you can't do too much at once. You have to do it in a way that's sustainable over time, so you get the appropriate doses at the right times, at the right intensities, and you do it consistently over time. So being rigid within that, our previous conversation, I think we talked about variation within consistency too, which is also important.
Yes.
So finding ways to make the same stuff feel fresh and feel new and feel engaging. So we could tie this into games. Like I'm having the kids sprint on the same 30 yards of turf every week. Every week we're sprinting on the same 30 yards of turf. So how many different ways can I make that engaging and feel? We're still getting sprints. At the end of the day, we're sprinting down the turf. But how many different flavors of that can I come up with? And you know what? And sometimes it doesn't feel fresh all the time. How many different times or different ways can you squat? There's plenty of different ways to squat, but ultimately, there's only so many patterns of human movement. So we're not finding new patterns. And if anybody's finding them, then I don't know about them. That there's the same 7 patterns that we're doing, and there's only so many ways to do that. So they're also embracing those moments where it doesn't feel fresh and it doesn't feel engaging. And I go through that myself, and I think it's a big part of why it's important for coaches to train too, is understanding that concept of, it's not going to be, there's going to be ebbs and flows to your enthusiasm about the process, but finding ways to stay with the process. For the vast majority of people, if you can do something consistently enough with the right intent and the right purpose, like, you're probably going to get pretty good at it. Certainly better than the average bird. I'm pretty damn consistent with not everything in life, but the things that matter to me and the things that I care about. But there's periods too where I'll fall off too, and whatever life happens, right? We all know that life happens. You have a greater stress load than other weeks, and maybe you only got 2 sessions in, on a bad week, or whatever the thing might be. But so the other skill too is being able to get back on the horse, because momentum is powerful in both directions. I recently had a little dip. I'm good for like maybe a biannual or maybe quarterly dip in, like, where I just feel flat and you start to question things. You don't have the enthusiasm for the process, whatever the process might be, if it's training, if it's career, if it's whatever it might be. And I'm just coming out of one and finally feeling good. It only lasts a couple days and I'm down and I'm like, I know it's going to be okay. Being able to course correct quickly and have faith in yourself that I'm not going to ride this negative momentum and it's going to turn into a week, into a month, and then, you're so far off the path, it gets harder and harder to get back on.
Do you have anything that you turn to that helps you, that that'll get you out of that?
For me, lifting weights. No, for me, it's interesting, man, because when I get into those funks, and again, I don't know if it's seasonal. I used to always have one after hockey season when I was coaching. I would call it like the hockey hangover, because you're just going for 3.5 months, and like, you're the captain of the ship, so you can't have an off day. So you got to bring it. You got to bring it when you're sick. You got to be that. It's not perfect every day, but you're steering the ship. So then hockey would end, and then I feel like I would just like deflate, and I'm out of dopamine. I'm out of enthusiasm, and I'm not the person who I like to think I am all the time. During these times, I always feel like untethered. My routine, like my identity, who I think that I am, who I like to think that I am on a day-to-day basis. I feel untethered from that. If I could wave a magic wand and like snap myself out of it, I would. I found that it takes some time. And the more I can cling to like my big pillars, which are really simple things, dude. Exercise, going to bed on time, eating good food.
Yep.
Whatever,
Yep.
because during these times too, it can be easy to be like, oh, I'll just get drunk. I'll just get high. Whatever the thing might be, you might look for like quick fixes, quick dopamine hits, and you can do those things, but you always feel worse afterwards because like now, maybe I felt good for a moment, but now I feel you get that rebound, and now I feel down again and worse because that's not actually good for me.
I wanted to talk about, I mean, this is going to rub so many communities the wrong way, but you know what? I don't care anymore because I've been sitting here watching, like you said, Instagram and Facebook and wherever we see our social media stuff and posts. There's going to be controversial topics. There's going to be people just trying to get attention. But it seems like as coaches, especially in the training world, that there are so many modalities. And instead of building our toolbox with all of the different modalities and using them for when they're supposed to be used or when the best scenario is, it's like, hey, there's a nail there. I'm probably going to use a hammer. The fitness industry may be like, no, this screwdriver here can do everything. How do you navigate all of these different realms with respect to what they offer, and then also utilize them in your toolbox?
How much time do you have? A couple things there, man. I don't even know where to start. If someone is all in, if they have the magic wand and all other modalities are no good, I think they're telling on themselves. They're more concerned with marketing and with sales than they are with actually educating. They're either are shameless and just are wanting business and wanting power and want to portray themselves as the all-knowing guru, if that's their motivation, or they're telling on themselves that they are ignorant and they don't actually understand strength and conditioning, fitness, the human body, how dynamic it is, how different each person's body is, and how you can elicit adaptations a bunch of different ways and get people better or moving better or performing better a bunch of different ways. There's so many ways to skin a cat. Every single good coach understands that. We should be seeking to work ourselves out of a job, to not be the guru, to empower the people, because they have how many hours in the week? We only get them a few hours a day or a few hours a week. So to actually get people better, to actually have them recover better and perform better and understand stress, we need to educate them and empower them to do that thing. So if I'm the all-knowing guru who has the one thing and the one answer, and I only have the answers, you're trying to keep people on the hook. You're running a cult, and you're not actually, you don't actually have the people's best interest in mind. And what drives me nuts is that like you'll see these different communities, they'll have these like this cult following of people who will like go to war for them, and that's not even a slight at their modalities, what they actually do. Like
there's so many positive things that you can gain from their modalities. It's just a matter of how they're approaching it to explain it and teach it to others.
Exactly. In my opinion, it's promoting more confusion in an already like muddied, confusing industry. It's just adding fuel to that fire, getting people less connected with themselves and with their bodies, and more dogmatic than pragmatic, more just bought in on the tools than what's actually happening in my body, and understanding stimulus and inputs and all these things that actually affect me. You're just hyperfixating on one piece because one guy with who speaks with confidence and has good marketing tactics is pushing this one thing.
Yep. Well, with all that said, now I do want to hear the positive side in how you could take these kinds of methods, theories, exercises. How can you utilize them into your own training and your coaching?
That's my favorite part of strength and conditioning, and probably what makes it really hard to actually market strength and conditioning is that it borrows and steals all the great things from all the different arenas. You got your powerlifting, you got training like your sprinting, your plyometrics, you got your mobility stuff, your joint health stuff. You could be, if you went all in just on one of those, right? If you went all in on the meathead stuff, the nose bleeding, which I have a bias and a tendency towards, but if you went all that could be a cult in and of itself too. If you're all bought in on any one modality, you're missing pieces of the pie, right? We're complex. We need different inputs. Performance is complex. You probably have some really low hanging fruit in some other areas that you're missing out on. So just, and again, that's the beauty of S&C is it takes from all the different camps. The goal is performance and health and feeling good. So we measure the effectiveness of the tools in our performance. If you're doing these, if you're part of whatever movement, cult, or you're doing whatever classes, not all classes are bad, but there's really no measure of like, are we actually getting better? Are we actually getting stronger? You might feel better, and that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. You might feel better. It might be something that you enjoy doing that adds value to your life, and those are positive things too. Like there's absolutely as much value in that as there is in the physical things. Strength and conditioning is held accountable to those qualitative and quantitative things. Like we're measuring, we're checking in, we're doing assessments. We have number data, I have anecdotal data, I have feedback from my athletes of how we're feeling, and I can see how you're performing. So we don't have the luxury of being dogmatic in our approaches, and if you are, then you're probably not going to be in business for very long.
All wise words, and I've learned a lot from this conversation. I know parents and athletes and other coaches are going to take a lot away from this as well. I want the people to be able to reach out to you if they want to connect. So if anyone wants to connect with you, where can they find your content and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest is Instagram. I'm Coach_Whyte, and that's White with a Whyte. Coach_Whyte on Instagram is probably where I'm most easily accessible. And if you want to connect, shoot me a DM, and I'll be pretty good at getting back to you pretty quickly.
Awesome. I will put all of that in the show notes as well. So if you're listening right now and you don't have a moment to write this down, or you don't have the hands free, you can click on the links in the show notes. Just go on ahead down there and you'll be able to connect with Steven that way. Steven, man, thank you so much for connecting. I really appreciate your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, likewise, brother. Thanks, John.
Appreciate you, man.